It's a question and answer. Usually we do this the first Thursday of the month, but I like doing it so much that I refuse to let Catherine do it when she did meditation last week. So I'm doing it tonight. And I'll remind you that the answers that I give you are not the perfect answer. They're just the most perfect answer that I have for you tonight. They're not written in the gospel or in stone anywhere. I mean, maybe somebody's listening to my answers and writing them in stone somewhere, but that seems like a big waste of time, because if you ask me again in 10 years, I'll give you a much better answer. And when you ask your question, it doesn't have to be like exactly about meditation. It can be tangentially related, or it could be just any kind of internal thing. Ask me about forgiveness, ask me about how do I deal with stress at work, whatever. And if you are on Instagram, you can type it in. If you're watching live, if you are at home on Zoom, you can type it in, or you can raise your hand. I'm not sure that I can see your tiny hands because you're in tiny boxes, but you can do either one of those. And if you're here, you can raise your real life hand. So, questions? Yes, Mary?
Is that okay if you just go with my instinct
In real world?
Yes.
Going with your instinct, is it okay?
Only.
Only instinct? Clearly not. Have you never had a bad experience when you just act out of instinct?
Or how we can make practice.
Yeah, I understand. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. My answer is something about balance, but yeah, the answer is no, you cannot just go on instinct. Did you ever read that book, Thinking Fast and Slow?
No.
It's great, you should read it. I've written about it a bunch of times. You want to sit all the way over there? All right, fine. I've talked about it and written about it in a couple of things, so by the 10th time you guys have heard me mention it, you should read this book. I don't remember the author's name, but Thinking Fast and Slow is wonderful. It's one of the best works that I've read about instinct or intuition, and it's like the two different methods of solving problems, basically. So as humans, we actually have a really marvelous machine that is so good at making very quick decisions, and this is instinct, intuition, and this is the vast majority of things that we do during the day. You're not stopping and having a logical process, right? If you're driving and somebody pulls in front of you, you don't stop and think, well, what should I do? Because you've already crashed into that car. You have to kind of respond. And on some level, if we really simplified it, our practice and even our meditation practice is really all about setting aside time to train ourselves so that when something happens that we need to act quickly on, we can just get out of the way and let it happen because we've trained it so that it becomes our kind of new intuition, our new instinct, right? So before you started martial arts, somebody throws a punch at you, your instinct is to do this, or maybe this, okay? And of course that's better than getting punched in the eyeball, but it is almost the worst thing that you can do. Much better would be to like block or move out of the way. Closing your eyes does not help you. So you kind of train yourself to do this over and over and over again. Your partner is throwing punches at you, or you're just doing it on the counter, it's mitts or whatever. And then eventually that becomes instinct, right? So the problem is our time is not infinite. Our time, but also our time in general in life is not infinite. We don't have enough time to train ourselves to do every single little thing to make it instinct, to make it intuition. The majority of the things that we do by intuition are just kind of by accident. It's just the way that it happened. So if we could control it so that we actually had enough time to train everything and make it instantaneously correct, then sure, I would say actually you could do everything. The problem is you're eventually going to run into something that you have not thought about and trained to do correctly. So in that case, then sometimes intuition is going to work just fine. Most of the time, intuition, I think, will get us most of the way. But then there are going to be a lot of situations where it doesn't get us far enough, or actually our intuition is bad, like doing this. So For my suggestion to you is for the things that you know you're going to encounter in life, or for the things that you really just like doing because it's fun, like martial arts. I hope nobody ever punches you, but you like to practice this, so you do it, right? But for other things, for driving, like there's a reason that you practice driving a lot so that you can deal with the things that happen automatically. For other things like, a recurring conversation that you have very often with somebody, or with a thought that you have because somebody just looks at you funny at work. You kind of know that you're going to deal with this, and so you train yourself out of your old way of doing it into a new way of doing it. But again, that's the most common things, the things that you know that you're going to encounter, or kind of like self-defense, the things that it's not so common, but if it happened, it would be really bad. Like, there was that time back in the 60s, I guess, when they were thinking that Cuba was going to throw nukes at us at any moment, and so they were like, get under your desk, and it was never actually going to help if a nuclear bomb hit, but it was a thing that they practiced over and over again. We've got things that we probably practice as kids when you grow up in California. Did any of you grow up in California? You spent a lot of time where there were earthquakes, right? So, okay, I'll tell you what happens when you grow up in California. I was in Northern California as a kid. They teach you like what to do and what not to do in case of an earthquake. And when an earthquake finally hit, I think this was 1996. It was 94, 96. It was a big earthquake up in Northern California. And I'm wrestling with my cousin when this happens. And so for the first while, we think that it's just us wrestling. And then we stopped wrestling, and the house kept shaking. And I realized this is an earthquake, because I'd been in little earthquakes before, but never a big one. This one lasted what seemed like 30 seconds. It was probably like 5 seconds, but it was long-ish. And so I just ran outside, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to stay inside so that a telephone pole doesn't fall on you or the power lines don't electrocute you. You're supposed to get in like a door frame. Or nowadays they say you create the triangle of life and you get like right next to a piece of furniture so that when stuff falls, it falls on the furniture and you are alive in the triangle. So we practiced stuff like that. Didn't work for me. I ran outside. I yell, earthquake! And I run outside, and there's a giant tree going like this. And it fell down, not while I was out there, because the earthquake was so long, I had enough time to run back inside and sit there. And then the earthquake ended. In any case, my point is, something like an earthquake, something that is really dangerous that you should train yourself to be able to deal with. This is a good thing to spend your time kind of building up good automatic reactions to make that become your intuition. But for all the other stuff, and the vast majority of life is still going to be stuff that is kind of, maybe it's a choice between intuition or I have to think about it because I haven't dealt with it before. Usually you're just going to have to go with intuition because it's fast, right? How do I walk? How do I whatever? But then you've got problems that you have plenty of time to set aside some time and think about. How am I going to do this? Okay, and there is a balance to be had there because so often we just ruminate and we spend lots of time thinking about stuff that we don't really need to think about anymore. So this is what I wrote the newsletter on. It's like, how do you know when to stop thinking? One possible way of answering that would be when I keep doing the same thing in my head over and over and over again. I just replay the same scenario or the same options again, and I'm just kind of stewing in my own stress. Then just make the decision and move on. Be done with it. You already have the information. It's time to decide, right? But exactly where that balance is going to be kind of unclear sometimes. But that is one of the clearest ways, I think, that you can kind of create a balance in the moment. Now, some people swear, like, I'm a very intuitive person. It just always works out for me. And possibly you are more in touch with your intuition, or your intuition is just better. I'm sure that that's possible. I think most likely what's happening, if it's working out for you, it's a combination of luck, and I am able to get out of my logical brain and kind of allow intuition to work rather than stopping myself. So you've experienced the opposite of that doing martial arts, where you've actually trained your body to do something really well, but then you start thinking, and you're like, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do now? And if you just stop thinking, your body will move. So this is basically Mushin. This is what the wall scroll says, right? No mind. When I've trained myself, and then I can put myself in this state where I just automatically act because I'm not overthinking it. That's a great skill to have for sure. I can stop talking at any point. You guys kind of get the idea of what I'm getting at here. It's balanced, and it depends on the situation. Recognize if you find yourself just running through the same stuff over and over again, and just be able to let it go. And the last thing I'll say about this is, one of my favorite answers that my Sifu always gave is, for example, for your question, can I just keep going on intuition? If it keeps working, keep doing it. And when it stops working, then hope that it doesn't stop working during an earthquake. Hope that it stops working when you have time to actually think about it. But there will be times where you realize intuition's not working. And sometimes it's like you give it a second thought, and in your second thought, you create a pause and you realize, I need to not do the thing that I was about to do. So it can be also very helpful to just give yourself one little pause and ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? And if you've got really good reasons not to, then don't do it. So listening to your intuition, but also giving yourself that second thought and asking yourself, is that the right thing to do? But you don't often need a third or a fourth or a fifth or a sixth thought where you just keep second guessing yourself. Other question? Samir.
So when you don't have anything on your mind and you're just at peace within yourself, and then all of a sudden you realize that you are not thinking anymore, and then you start to think, what do you do? How do you let go?
So you're describing a scenario in meditation, I assume?
When you're just out walking.
You're just out walking, and you're not thinking about anything at all. It's a moving meditation.
And then you realize that you're thinking, not thinking, and then you start thinking.
And then you start thinking. So what you're describing is a really nice kind of happenstance, and it could be something that you really are working on and trying to make it happen more often, maybe in meditation. That is a big part of what's supposed to happen in meditation, is to allow your mind to become clear and then just be in it. And then what happens all the time in sitting meditation is then you recognize it and you start to think. And that was like my experience the first time that I meditated, and then also my experience almost every time since then that I've meditated. Anytime I get like a nice clear head, then I start to think, hey, I'm doing it. I'm so good at meditation. And then you have to let that go. So how do you do that? In meditation, what's the thing that we're training ourselves to keep doing? Being present by focusing on what? The breath, right? So in meditation, you have a thought, you're thinking, even if you're thinking, well, I'm not thinking. I mean, now you're thinking, right? So then how do you get back to the present? Focus on the breath. When you refocus on the breath, that lets go of this thought. And we don't get rid of thought in meditation by trying to force out thought or by thinking to ourselves, don't think, don't think, don't think. Now, sometimes that is what happens in meditation, and we want to be able to let go of that and just continue coming back to the breath. Now, when you are moving, then you have other options, right? So you can focus on your breathing. You can focus on your movement, whatever it is that you're doing right now, right? You're really in the flow with it. You're dancing. I don't dance, but if I did, I would imagine it would go like this. You're dancing and you're just feeling the rhythm of the music, and you're moving, and it's like, this is great. And then you start thinking, you're like, oh, and now you're getting self-conscious. I don't know, am I doing a good job of dancing? Are people watching me? Am I good? Tell me I'm pretty. And then you just like realize, oh, I need to stop thinking those stupid thoughts, and then just focus back on, maybe you're listening to the music, or you're just feeling your body move. So this is again totally necessary in our physical practice of martial arts, right? You're rolling with somebody in jiu-jitsu, and you start to get in the groove of it, and you're just rolling, and stuff just starts to happen naturally, and it's great. And then you start thinking, right? You do something really great, and you think, I'm so amazing! Wow! Did you see that? I hope everybody was looking. Sifu, did you see what I just did? And then and then you realize, oh, I'm falling into that same trap. So then you let it go by just refocusing on whatever the thing is that you're doing in that present. And look, this is martial arts and enlightenment, and literally like the highest form of humanity is just doing what we're doing. And when our brain tries to get in the way and the ego tries to, insert itself and start to judge, am I doing this right? Or is this person better than me? Or all the things that we're doing with our brains, we're trying to be able to let go of that. Now, like I say all the time, I think it's kind of unhelpful to think of enlightenment as being a permanent state that we never leave, like I'm just in this meditative bliss for the rest of my life. It's very unlikely to happen that way. But it's something that we can spend more time in, and it's something that we can practice. So this is what somebody called once letting go of the habit of ego identification. Our habit is to keep going back to the ego. Our habit is to have that thought of judgment or whatever. And then when we're able to let go of that thought, that's creating a new habit. So we let go of that habit of ego identification, we create a new habit of being in the present, of watching the breath, of feeling our body's movement, of watching our partner's movement. That's a great answer to your question, right? Other question. Anybody at home have one? Type it to me if you've got one, because there's a thing that goes across the front and I can't see if you've got anything. I'm sure that Tanya is awake enough at this point to be asking me a question. It's just got a thing that goes in front of where their hand gets raised, so I can't tell. You can just type the beginning of your question to me if you want. Anybody else here have a question? You got another one? Yes.
So how does enlightenment feel?
How does enlightenment feel? I wish I could tell you.
So how somebody knows, okay, I'm there.
Yeah, I'll do my best with this. So somebody very boldly once asked my Sifu, they're like, sir, are you enlightened? And he's like, no, I haven't had that experience yet. I really like that because there's a whole philosophy behind this that some people really believe that we continue being reincarnated until we eventually hit enlightenment, and then that's like breaking out of the cycle of reincarnation. I don't personally believe that, but I think it's a very helpful way to kind of think of life and the progress that we're making. I think that if you think of enlightenment as a one-shot thing, then you're like, that's the thing that I'm aiming for, is I no longer get reincarnated. And then some people are like, well, why would you want that? Because isn't the world so great? Don't you want to just keep doing this forever? If you think about that, you probably realize the answer is no, you don't want that. So you kind of want to break free of it. So part of it is like on a logistical level, this is one of the ideas of enlightenment, is you break free of the karmic cycle of reincarnation. It's not necessarily something that you feel, but if that is kind of your faith, if that's what you believe is happening, you'll know it for sure when you die and you don't come back. And the idea is your consciousness kind of gets absorbed into the greater consciousness. You become part of like God consciousness of the universe. And then you'll definitely recognize something has happened. There are experiences that you will have during meditation, and this is not something that you want to be attached to, because this is going to be similar to Samira's question. If you start thinking about this and you get attached to having to have something, then that's just thought that you're having. And if you're sitting there meditating and the whole time you're like, how come I'm not enlightened yet? Or how come I'm not experiencing this? Or how come I'm not experiencing that? You want to be able to let go of any kind of idea like that. So what may happen is you may feel maybe a physical sensation or just like a recognition in your mind that your thoughts and your ego just drop away from you. Very different from I'm forcing the ego and the thoughts out. It's because I'm so relaxed and focusing on the breath that everything else just falls away. And so it can feel like a physical weight is lifted from you, or it can feel like the physical weight has just dropped from you. Sometimes you'll feel a physical sensation in your body where things kind of drop. And maybe that's that. Maybe it's like my body is getting really grounded and rooted, and it just feels really nice and solid in that moment. You might experience, like some people experience, lights. You'll see lights in your brain, in your mind's eye, and this could actually be, certain neurons firing, or they say like you're opening up the third eye, and you might experience something like that. I've had a related thing where I felt like my head was floating, like an out-of-body experience. And some of these things happen just naturally because you're spending enough time in a very focused state of mind where you don't have distractions or extra thoughts. And this is not going to happen, hold on, this is not going to happen if you are focusing on something that is really kind of keeping your brain in this, your mind in this region of the brain. It's very like active, very active front brain cerebral. You're doing something kind of logical, like doing a really hard math problem. You might kind of get into a state of flow, but you're not going to have this kind of out-of-body experience, for example, or like a feeling of opening the third eye. The thing you're focusing on has to be incredibly simple, like the breath, or even I've let go of the breath, and so now I'm just totally present, and what's happening is nothingness. I'm just kind of absorbed by nothingness. Did you have something that you wanted to ask about this thing? This is a different question? Don't raise your hand while I'm in the middle of a rant, Samira. Okay, so you could experience something like that. People say like, oh, I hear a noise or I saw a thing. The problem that I have with this whole conversation about this is then you start to search and you start to get attached to this. And the truth is, it will likely not be the exact same experience for any two people. So you might hear somebody or read a book and they're like, this is what you experience. And then you're like, well, how come I've never experienced that? I guess I'm just not trying hard enough to do that, and then you're holding on to it, and it's never going to happen. So really, meditation is a practice of letting go, and in letting go, then it will just kind of happen naturally for us. Whatever it is, we don't know. Depends on you. Depends on the kind of meditation that you're doing. Depends on whatever is there for you to have. So enlightenment is something and nothing, and almost certainly nothing in particular, and almost certainly comes in like stages. So if you read this book that we have in the lobby called something that I've forgotten now, Illumination, the Mind Illuminated. The Mind Illuminated is a textbook. It's like this thick, and it kind of denotes these different levels of states of mind that you might have, or kind of levels of your meditation. And this is a way to kind of go about it. And you might find, for example, I can't remember what he described the levels at exactly, but it's like level 1 is I'm spending more time thinking about thoughts than I am about the breath. And then level 2 is now I'm spending more time thinking about the breath than I am about thoughts. Hard to quantify that because you're not actually like tallying down the number of thoughts versus breath that you have, but generally your experience is I'm more focused on the breath than I am on the thoughts. And when that starts to happen, you might be tempted to think of it like a video game. It's like I'm always trying to level up and get to the next thing. That's its own form of attachment, which gets us nowhere. But you will probably at some points recognize, like, yeah, in my meditation, I am focused more on the breath. And then most importantly, in the rest of my life, I am more calm. I am more able to just be in the present. And whether or not we ever have this kind of, fireworks in our brain, if we're making that steady kind of progress, or we're just very steadily doing our meditation progress, that is its own kind of enlightenment. Try not to get too attached to or excited about something that's really dramatic. So I'm going to do the question that somebody has typed to me over here. It's a very long question, so here we go. Great, 2 of them. Okay, so Deborah's asking me about the sound bowl. So, the sound, how do we incorporate this into our practice? Tai Chi kind of come from India. I'll talk about that a little bit. I don't know. Yes, great, I got it. Yes, of course it's appropriate, Deborah. There are very few inappropriate questions. Well, there are lots of inappropriate questions, but you've done a great job of talking about something. So, another example of a thing that we could focus on instead of the breath would be Om. You've heard people chanting Om, and you can certainly do this not in the dojo during our meditations because we're doing a silent breathing meditation, but that can be great. You can chant yourself. You can listen to somebody else chanting. I am not a huge fan of I have to have something else with me. So for example, the sound bowl, sometimes I'll use that to end the meditation. Sometimes during meditation, I'll hit the sound bowl just as like an opportunity to refocus and be present. Involving the auditory system and focusing on a sound can be a really useful tool in your meditation. And if I have to listen to this specific, audio file and I don't have my phone with me and I can't meditate, then it is counterproductive. Now, you chanting is something that you can take with you anywhere and at any time, and that can work super well for you. So if you like to chant and focus on the sound of you going Om, and it works wonderful. And try to also do some silent meditation, because you can't be walking around all day long going Om unless you go live in a place by yourself where nobody cares and you don't have to talk to anybody. But can be great, and again, within balance. So same idea is like, can I visualize something and use that as my meditation focus? Sure. But if that's the only thing that you do, then it has kind of its drawbacks as well. And I tend to keep going back to using the breath as a focus because it's a thing that you can do all day, any day. I'm not trying to say that that's the only great kind of meditation, but it is very useful, and the only time that you can't breathe is when you're dead. So you can breathe in any situation that you are alive, and you can always use that. But Om is a really great second, or a sound that you can create and take with you anywhere you go is a really great other option, as something that you can focus on. And then the other one from Tanya. As I get very close to the end of this class, okay, great. When re-beginning something, could be meditation, practice. Did you just edit your thing? Thank you. When re-beginning something, you've already reached this, no more editing this question time. You've reached a certain level of success with meditation, exercise, starting over in life. There's a certain feeling of, wow, I get to start this again. Yes, but also a feeling of, oof, I'm here again. How do you let that go? How do you let go of that, oof, I'm here again? I focus more on the excitement of it. Yeah. I mean, this could be with so many things. In my martial arts practice, for example, I got to a certain level in Kung Fu, and I got my black sash, and I started doing Jiu-Jitsu, and I showed up. I moved to California when I already had a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu, but it was basically like starting over. I was with a totally different school of people. I'm still basically a beginner, and it's fun to restart over. And absolutely, there are times where I feel like, oh, I really suck at this, and that's disappointing because I'm used to being good at stuff. And this is something that we get to experience when we start something new, but also when you restart something. I know you're talking about going back to practice. I assume you're talking about returning to practice physically with Aikido, and going back to practicing MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And it can be fun to restart something, but then also the first time that somebody lands a punch on you, you go, oof, I'm restarting this, and it's not a very fun experience. And most of the time, it's not going to be such an obviously painful experience, at least not physically, but certainly there is an emotional pain that comes along with restarting and realizing that you're not as good as you might want to be or you might expect yourself to be. And so Tanya's question is, how do we focus on the excitement of restarting something? And I mean, I don't know if I can think of a better way of doing it than just focus on the exciting parts of it. Maybe the feeling of excitement, you can focus on, the physical feeling of whatever that is in your body. Focus on the newness of it, the new exciting things that you're learning. Uh, Again, when we're physically practicing and somebody lands something on us and we go, oh, I'm bad at this, versus somebody kicks us and we go, wow, that was such a good kick, right? You want to kind of reframe your experience and your focus so that not, not everything in life can be a good positive experience, but so much of it can be. And I'll tell you, if you're practicing martial arts and you don't like losing because somebody kicks you and you go, I'm bad at this, you're not going to have a good time practicing because it is so much of that. If you're meditating and you don't like the experience of having a thought and recognizing that your mind has wandered, and then you start thinking, this is the opposite of what Samira was asking before, you're thinking, oh, I'm not supposed to be thinking, what's wrong with me? And then you kind of go into this downward spiral. You are drowning in this experience of, I'm bad at meditation. And that's not going to be enjoyable either. So what we're doing with meditation and with our physical practice and any other time we're trying to train ourselves to be intuitive, you are training yourself to go back to a certain thought. In meditation, I'm training myself to go back to the breath. And in sparring, I'm training myself to go back to, seeing this as an opportunity rather than a challenge or rather than a bad thing, right? My partner in jiu-jitsu, my partner gets an underhook, what do? Overhook. There's an opportunity, right? They're giving you this, there's an opportunity to do something else. And when we are, focusing on that mindset, it eventually becomes automatic. But when you're starting something new or you're restarting something, there's so much that is fun about that. So just recognize when your brain starts to go to, like, I'm bad at this and the negativity, and then recognize, instead of beating yourself up for being in the negative, recognize that is an opportunity. The opportunity that is here is for me to refocus on something that is positive or something that will allow me to be creative in this moment. And this is really what we're doing with meditation as well, because you will recognize a thought, you will start to think negatively about yourself and have that self-judgment, and then that is in and of itself its own opportunity to refocus and just be in the present, to refocus on the breath. And I'll give you a very simple way of doing this tonight. I'll even let you do this in class as long as you keep it fairly quiet. So when you're sitting and you're meditating and you recognize a thought and you want to go back to the breath, sometimes when people refocus on the breath, they're refocusing on it because, oh, I realized that I wasn't doing it, and so it's like that's the way I refocus. And I'm like kind of angry about it. But a slightly different twist on that, when you refocus on the breath, is, oh, this is my opportunity to refocus on the breath, and that's going to be so nice. So it sounds like, and that, as long as you're doing it quietly enough to not mess with everybody else's meditation, can shift things in simultaneously a very subtle and a very profound way. Because returning to the breath with a comforting sigh that feels like you're returning home after a long trip, and it's like, it's nice, feels great. And then in that moment, there's no more judgment. There's no more, I'm beating myself up for not, meditating properly. I'm just back on the breath, and it feels really nice. So you guys can do that as loudly as you want to at home and fairly quietly here in the dojo. Sit comfortably. We're going to do a somewhat short meditation because I got so many great questions tonight. Close eyes, spine straight, eyes upturned. Just turn that off for me. Thank you, ma'am. Relax. Watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. be here now. When your mind wanders, you can gently refocus on the breath with that sigh. And continue doing that as many times as you need to throughout the meditation.